Sorry about that, I had a bit of technical difficulties. So welcome to my webinar on vet interviews, focusing specifically on MMIs and the different stations of MMIs. So for those of you that don't know, a lot of courses, for example, veterinary, medicine and dentistry, like to use MMIs within their interview process. So you have various stations around the room. You'll have 5 minutes per station, and at each station you have a chance to read a question on a piece of paper and then answer to the interviewer. So it could be on different things, for example, calculations or work experience or on your personal statement. So I'll get into that later on. So within this webinar, I'm going to talk about why vet schools interview candidates, how you can prepare for interviews, what to wear for the interviews, different formats. So for example, there's face-to-face interviews, group style interviews, MMIs, which I'm going to focus on. And then just before interview, you can get situational judgment tests and online questionnaires, which are really important to fill out, obviously, before interview, because that might be what your interviews are going to be based on. And then I'm going to briefly talk about examples of questions that you can ask in the end of interviews that are useful. And then useful resources that I found really helpful, for example, websites, books, blogs, different conferences, and all the useful resources that I talk about I'll include in the section underneath the video. So firstly, why do vet schools interview candidates? So by this point, you'll have finished your personal statement, your online questionnaires, and anything like that, and you've applied to the vet school of your choice. So now vet schools want to find out more about you as a candidate and whether you have the motivation to do the course that you're applying for, because vet school and the profession is very demanding and it is tough at times. And I know, just even from being in first year, doing half a year, it is tough and you are in a lot and there is a lot of pressure on you to do well. But don't get me wrong, it is a really good and fun course, but the interviewers want to know that you've got the motivation and you know what you're letting yourself in for, in a way. And also it's a fast-paced environment, so they want to know that you can keep up with other students and you can become a vet and you can strive in your profession. And so this is really just a chance for them to get to know you more and get to know your motivations and how well you're going to do in the future. Okay, so how can you prepare for interviews? So I've heard a lot of people say that you can't really prepare for interviews, and it's a lot about what questions you're going to ask. And I really disagree with this, because I did a lot of preparation for my interviews and it did really help. So what I found really helpful was to go online and look at practice interview questions, and in books that some of the books that I found really helpful I include in the section underneath. And so there's common questions that are normally asked in interviews, such as why do you want to come to vet school? What qualities there are as a vet? Why do you want to be a vet? Which is actually quite a hard question if you think about it. So what's really helpful for me was to do mock interviews with families and friends. You can do mock interviews with schools or with Medic Mentor. So Medic Mentor offer a lot of vet school interview preparation and actually trials, and they can help you and you can work out where you're going wrong in interviews and like how you can improve. If you don't have the option and your family and friends are quite busy, testing yourself and asking yourself questions in front of a mirror is also quite helpful. And even videoing yourself, like now, like I felt quite nervous doing this before, but after I can watch this video back, I can notice what all my tics are, and so what my bad habits are and things like that. And then so you're able to watch it back, and then like me trying to improve my presentation skills, you can watch it back and learn if you're going a lot, or you're playing with your hands during interviews. So when you do go to the interview, you can practice on things like that. I find it really helpful to look at research to research common and recent welfare issues in the vet community. This is really helpful because it allows you to develop your own opinions on topics. For example, zoos, hunting, badger culling to do with TB, horse racing, or things like this, because interviewers want you to have the ability to look on both sides. So they want you to, for example, zoos. A lot of people believe that animals should be in their natural habitat and they shouldn't be in zoos. However, there are a lot of pluses of zoos, for example, for conservation reasons, for research, and things like that. So it's important to look on both sides of the argument, and then you can develop your opinion on what you think, what you believe. And so what I found really helpful was to practice talking about a certain topic, for example, the welfare in zoos, or the welfare to do with horse racing. And I would talk about this topic for about 2 minutes, and then I had my family member to then play devil's advocate and think about, oh, well, what about this side of the argument, and what about this? And then you'd have to try and you'd have to try and argue your side of the argument, but then it allows you to take in both sides, so you can think about their side of the argument and then come to a conclusion on what you believe. And this is really important for interviews because it allows interviewers to know that you're thinking about both sides of the argument, and then you can make a judgment based on this. Look on university websites as well. So on a lot of the university website, there's details about what interviews are looking for. So this is really important. Keeping a diary of interesting cases you've seen in work experience and what you learned from that scenario. For example, I found it really helpful to make a logbook of all the cases and interesting cases I saw on placement. For example, mastitis on farms, or a portosystemic shunt in a dog, which is actually a really rare condition. And having something like that to talk about in an interview is a really interesting topic, and it allowed me to stand out against other people that might be talking about more generic things. So then once I made the logbook, I then went and researched what the causes and diagnosis and treatments of any diseases related. I looked at any topical issues related to that area, and then I looked at various stakeholders around that. So, for example, when thinking about the ethics, for example, a dog with a portosystemic shunt, I looked at around the ethics of for the stakeholders, for example, the dog, welfare issues related to that, the owner's responsibility to look after the dog and to have to pay for the dog and provide correct welfare, the vet who has to carry out surgical treatments and what surgical treatments if that's the case, and carry out things based on the amount of money that the owners have, and then also the RSPCA. So and then legislations as well involved around cases. For example, not necessarily portosystemic shunt, but if, for example, if there was like a certain breed of dog, the Dangerous Dogs Act would come in, or the Animal Welfare Act if the owner wasn't looking after the dogs. So therefore, looking at legislation is really important because it looks on more of a political level and higher up the what other things that can affect the welfare and the cases of the animals. So I found this really interesting to keep a logbook, and then also afterwards do my research. Because when I got to interviews, this was really helpful because I could literally look back through my logbook, well, before the interview, look back through my logbook and have cases that I could bring to the table at interviews. On one of my interviews, I got told the interviewer's name beforehand. So this was quite helpful because I went and researched him and was able to look at his specific, what he specialised in. On this case, it wasn't helpful because it didn't ask me questions around his area. But in other instances, they're more likely to ask questions of things they specialise in. So this can be quite helpful. Also, to learn basic content, just for the veterinary interviews, for example, routine vaccines for cats and dogs, learn the 5 freedoms, which is really important when assessing animal welfare. And yes, I think that's it for how to prepare. And obviously there's other ways you can, but they're just the ones. Okay, so what to wear for interviews. So ideally you should dress smart. However, you don't need to wear a suit or feel like you need to wear like a black and white suit and a tie and blazer. You should wear like what you feel comfortable in, because power dressing is a thing. So you instantly feel more comfortable in clothes that you feel more comfortable wearing. So that therefore you're more likely to be more confident, and you'll come across better, and you'll come across more confident in the interviews. So the different formats of interviews include face-to-face interview, which is just like a panel interview, so it could be about half an hour long, and they could ask you generic questions. For example, like I've said, why do you want to come to vet school? Why do you want to be a vet? Good qualities of a vet. They could ask you questions about personal statements, about what you've seen. Questions about work experience and what you've seen, the cases. Or they can ask you questions about your personal statement and things like that. You can have group style interviews with other people. So I've not actually done them myself, but my friends have, and they had to work together as a group and complete a task. And so obviously in this instance, try and come across confidently, but also don't try and talk over other people and let everyone have the say. And then MMIs, which I'm going to focus on. So MMIs are, so for one of my interviews, I had an MMI, and it's called a multiple mini interview, which stands for MMI. And so there was about 8 different stations, and each different station was on something different. So it could have been personal statement, calculation station, a data handling station, practical task, following some instructions, problem solving. So what would you do in this scenario? An anatomical specimen, if they gave you, for example, a skull of a cat. There could be an ethics station, a work experience station, or a personal statement station. So I'm going to talk about them a lot, go into detail a lot more about those. And then there was also situational. So these are before interviews, so you can get situational judgment tests or online questionnaires, which so these can be used for interviews. So whatever you fill out, then the interviewers can ask questions based on them. So focusing on MMIs. So there's different stations, like I've said. So there's a calculation station, which are normally basic drug calculations. So normally you'd be working out the dosage rates from the weight of a patient and the concentration of a drug, which is quite common, or to work out drip rates of drugs. I can't really go into examples or like explain an example because they're quite hard, because every time I hold something up, it puts it the opposite way around. So the best thing I can really do is put some examples in the section below of some really useful resources I found online. So if you Google the University of Nottingham dosage calculations, they've got a really good section of different calculations and dosage calculations you're expected to know for the interviews. This is for medics, but it's exactly the same for veterinary and medics. So there's also a data handling section where they could give you a table or a graph and ask you to describe a trend, and then from this they could ask you what you think could be the reason for the trend shown. So in this scenario, it's best to not panic and think logically, which I find quite hard when I'm in an interview situation, and also read the question over and over again until you start. You normally have about 5 minutes to answer these questions, so you've actually got a lot of time to think about it. So for example, a question could say, creatinine is a normal waste product of tissues, and it's found in the blood in small levels and is then cleared by the renal system and passes out in the urine. High levels of creatinine within patients are abnormal. And then from this, it could then give you a table of creatinine blood levels in the dog over a certain time period. And then you could ask, and then from the table, you might have to tabulate the data to make a graph. For example, I've put an example here. So from the table, you would then have time along the x-axis and creatinine in the blood along the y-axis, and then as you can see, over time the creatinine in the blood increases a lot, and then it could say, why do you think this could be? And so a possible reason for high creatinine levels is kidney failure. And within this question, the answer was actually in the question. So I'll read out the top bit again. So it said creatinine is a normal waste product of tissues and is found in the blood in small levels and is cleared by the renal system and then passes out into the urine. High levels within patients are abnormal. So as you can see, it's cleared by the renal system, and renal obviously means kidneys. So a good explanation would be kidney failure. So high levels of creatinine in the blood mean kidneys aren't working properly, so the abnormality must be from the kidneys. But don't panic if you don't know what to say, and don't just leave it blank, because any question, like any answer left blank, is automatically 0. You might as well have a guess, and a lot of the time an educated guess is normally right. So moving on, it could be a practical task followed by some instructions. For example, in one of my interviews, I was asked to make it was like a shape using different sized pieces of string, and then I was allowed, and then I had to like blue tack them together to make a certain shape from instructions. And me being me, I, as soon as I got in there, just panicked and was like, I don't know what to do, which obviously is not ideal. So in this situation, try not panic. Read the question over and over and over again until you understand what it is that you're asked to do. And with these stations, you can't really prepare for them. But all I can say is don't panic and just read over the question again and again, because a lot of the time the task isn't actually that hard. It's just you get in your own mind and you panic, and then you don't read the question properly. And then you end up doing what I did and being asked to make a square, made a circle, which was not good. There's other stations like problem solving station. For example, what would you do in this scenario? So I made up an example question. So a dog has been in a road traffic accident and the owners said they wouldn't be able to afford it. What would you do in this situation and how would you react? So within this situation, it's obviously within your best interest so this is a question as if you are already a vet. So in this situation, your best interests are with the animal and you want to try and do whatever you can to save the animal. However, within the veterinary profession, this isn't always possible and cost does come into it. So there are other alternatives. For example, are there different treatments? Are there different treatments available for the owners? Are there any things that you could possibly do to try and reduce the costs? But then if the dog is in a really bad state and it needs this treatment, there are other options. For example, if it's really expensive, can you set up insurance plans? Are there any other family members that are able to pay for them? Are there any charities? For example, a lot of the time the RSPCA might get involved, and if it's like a really bad case, they could maybe be able to fund fund the treatment for the owners, and then if worse comes to worse and there aren't any alternatives, then it might be in the best interest of the animals to give painkillers and euthanasia. As sad as it sounds, it might be the best case for the animal, and this might have to be the solution. Another example could be if you, which after speaking to my friend who works in the vets, this is actually quite a common thing to happen. So if you accidentally lost a collar of an organ's dog who's been euthanized and they can't afford a cremation, and then they want something to remember them by, how would you approach the situation? So obviously you're in fault for losing the dog's collar. However, accidents do happen and we're all human at the end of the day. So me personally, how I'd approach the situation would be, I would take the man into a room away from everyone else in the practice. I would sit him down, offer him a tea and a drink. I'd firstly be completely honest, because honesty is always the key, and it's always the best thing you can do in that situation. I would apologise and tell him what happened, and also be very sympathetic towards him, because he's just lost a beloved family member, basically. And I would then give him the chance to talk about how he's feeling and what he's thinking. I would ask him, I'd find out more about him. So does he live on his own? Does he feel like does he have any other support of family members? Does he feel like he needs more support? And just basically speak to him as best as he can and understand how he's feeling. And then after this, are there any other alternatives you'd be able to offer? So has the man got anything else to remember his dog by? For example, photos, towels, dog bowls. Is there anything else? Is there anything else he can use as a memorabilia for his dog? But so don't worry if you can't think of anything on the spot. In the interviews will always push you and suggest ideas to help you out. So don't get flustered and think, oh my god, I don't know what to say, because the interviewers are there to help you and they do want to see you do well. They're not just there to try and trip you up and be mean. So don't worry too much about this. But and also in this situation, a lot of the time you get flustered. Well, I do, and I don't think logically. But if you take a step back and just think, right, what would I do in that situation? Think of it in different situations, as if you're a situation just like on the day-to-day basis. Like, what would you do in that scenario, and how would you approach it? Because a lot of the time, what you think you do is right, and it's logical. But when you're in that situation, you freak out and you don't know what to say. So moving on, there might be anatomical specimens, for example, like I said before, the bones of a cat. So it could be a skull, and in this, so there could be the bones of a cat, but there also could be some organs or a picture of a histological specimen. But the interviewers aren't expecting you to know this. They're not expecting you to know everything about the anatomy. That's why you go to vet school, to learn this. That's why you're studying for 5 years, because you're learning then. In these situations, they're just wanting you to have a go, and they're just wanting you to try and think logically about what you think. They're just trying to make you think logically, and yeah. So generally in these sessions, they're looking to see how the structure of the animal then relates to the function. So for example, like I said, the skull of a cat, the structure would be, it would have large eye sockets, canine teeth, and a specialized jaw. And obviously cats are carnivores, so for the function would be for hunting small animals, having good eyesight in the dark and be able to hunt out their prey. And so a lot of the time, again, if you think logically about what you see and its function, it's quite easy to suggest ideas and just have a go and answer what you think. So there could be a station on ethics. So this is why I was talking about the topical issues and having why it's important to be able to have an opinion and to know about different veterinary related topical issues and to form your opinions using both sides of the argument. And what I found really helpful was to use, like I did for the work experience, to have a logbook. So I wrote down all the different topical issues, like a little fact file. So, for example, brachycephalic dogs, hunting, tuberculosis, and badgers, obesity in dogs. I did about different fish diseases because I worked at Sea Life for a year, so that's what I found really interesting. Even just like different areas that people might not have thought of could be really interesting because they will make you stand out in interviews. So then once I had this fact file, I wrote down about half a page or A4 piece of paper, literally researching about all the different topical issues and the stakeholders within them. So how this related to the animal, how it related to the owners, how it related to the vets, how it related to legislations, more political. For example, like tuberculosis and badgers is has turned into quite a political debate. For example, the badger culling is controlled by the government, and so often there's a lot of like higher up laws and things looking at this. So I've done a little example exercise for the welfare. So for example, I was talking about, so here my printer ink was running out, so sorry about the bad quality, but this is an obese dog. Here is a picture of badger culling, and there's one here of a French bulldog and a pug, which are brachycephalic breeds. And then so in an ethics my station, you could be asked to describe what you see in the picture, describe the welfare, describe ethics related to this, and some ideas you could talk about. For example, obesity in dogs. You could talk about how obesity is such a common problem and how it's being really bad, and basically it's the owner's responsibility. So you talk about the importance of a good diet, not to give animals treats. You could also talk about the vet's responsibility, so how they're responsible to carefully monitor the dogs whenever they come in for checkups, educate the owners on good diets and healthy eating and not being given like treats. You talk about legislations involved, for example, the Animal Welfare Act. So if owner lets the dog get too obese, therefore the Animal Welfare Act could actually step in and could prohibit the dog being looked after by the owners. And then obviously, as we're talking about ethics, the welfare of the animal is very important. So you talk about different health problems caused by obesity, for example, heart disease, breathing problems, diabetes, arthritis. All these are exacerbated by obesity in dogs, and it's actually become a really big problem within the UK. Secondly, you can talk about badger culling. So badger culling is an ethical debate due to bovine tuberculosis. So a lot of people believe that, so it was believed that the transmission of bovine tuberculosis to cattle was highly due to badgers. Therefore, they believe that badgers spread the TB to cattle, and then so you could talk about the debate of different sides of the argument. And in 2016, actually 10,000 badgers were culled due to this debate. So it's a really big issue within the UK. And so you could talk about different opposing views of the scientists, the politicians, and the farmers, and how it's now turned into an economical and political debate. And you could talk about, and then also you talk about the welfare of the badgers and how is it ethical to really cull as many badgers, and then also look up scientific research and then back up your claims, because it's always good in an interview if you can bring up a figure or saying the scientist did research and I found out in this paper that, for example, I read a paper saying that the culling of badgers wasn't actually that helpful because once they were culled, it then disrupted the homing ranges, and then it allowed the badgers to spread even further around. So this could even exacerbate a problem. So just looking at research and scientific papers to back up your claims would also be really helpful for an interview. And then finally, brachycephalic dogs. So this has become a really big problem in the UK recently. So due to selective breeding and the public's preferences of dogs with more smushed in, more smushed in cute faces, for example, French bulldogs or pugs, it's caused the schools of dogs to actually cave in on themselves, and this has caused a variety of health problems. For example, the skin covering the face actually droops over, and so it causes face breathing problems, and also within the folds of the skin, they become a warm, moist environment, so you can get a lot of bacterial infections. Brachycephalic dogs can get dry eyes and ulcerations of where the folds in the skin have gone over their eyes, and they can also get a lot of respiratory problems as the soft tissue then obstructs the breathing airways, such as the nose and the throat. So these so brachycephalic dogs obviously is a big topic and a good one to research, and then the vet's responsibility is really important with this. So the vets are there to prioritise the welfare and also to educate the public on the health problems to do with brachycephalic dogs. So maybe owners might think twice before buying a brachycephalic breed, because if they knew about all the health problems and things associated with them. So these are just 3 examples of different topical issues that you could talk about, and there are loads more, and I'm going to post a little Word document underneath in the section which has some more issues and things related there. So there could be a station on work experience. So this is why it's really important to make sure you know your personal statement inside and out. So they could ask you questions about cases you've seen, about diagnoses, treatments, welfare implications related to the work experience. So this is why it's really helpful to record a logbook, like I was saying about before. And then related, another station is personal statements, which is quite similar. So in my interview, when I got there, they already had my personal statement printed out with various sentences highlighted in it, and then they'd ask me questions about different areas. So make sure you can back up anything you wrote in your personal statement and talk about them in more detail. For example, I had a sentence saying I was really interested in fish diseases, and I'd read a textbook looking into different fish diseases, because I used to work at Sea Life. I did a placement near there, and then in this interview they asked me to expand on this, and then I then talked about white spot disease and flukes found in aquarium fish, and then the treatments related to that. So they could literally ask you on absolutely anything in your personal statement, so make sure you know it inside and out. What I found really helpful to do was, like, the topical issues case was to go through my personal statement, and I highlighted every main part of it that I had a different work experience and what I'd learned from that work experience. And then I made various A4 sheets of paper and put the title on top of the page, and then wrote about a page, half a page, about what I'd seen on that instance, and then what I'd learned, and then just being able to expand. So then when I got into the interview, I wasn't freaked out, and I could then recall back on things I'd wrote about and things I'd seen, and then I was able to expand and talk about things a lot more clearly. Okay, so I think that's it for the different MMI stations. So I was also going to talk about examples of questions to ask at the end of interviews. So at the end, they always ask you, do you have any questions? And I always think it's best to try and ask a question if you can, and because it makes you come across like you're really interested and you want to know more, and that you're really motivated. So questions to ask if you're a graduate. This is what the question I asked, because I did a zoology degree first. So I asked questions, are there any other graduates on the call? Are there any other, like, basically ways that I can meet other graduates rather than just starting uni? And the different, okay, ignore that one. Different, so, or like different research opportunities. So for example, starting at Bristol, I asked if there was any other research opportunities which I could then do, and I found out if I take a year out that I could do a different research project in an area of my choice within the summer. So I found this really helpful, and it showed that I was a bit more motivated to learn about other things. You could ask questions about EMS, which is the work experience that we're required to do within our holidays. So any other questions you can think of, it's really good to ask questions. And then other useful resources, so some books, blogs, or conferences that I think were really helpful for me, I'm going to include in the section below in the video. So I think that was it for all my interview talk, and thank you for listening, and I'm happy to answer any questions. I'll see the questions.